John that's been a friend for a number of years. We have different memories of how we exactly met, but he's been a Pacific Theater fan and a really helpful member of my board of directors for several years, and I have a really strong affection for your pastor, so I think you're lucky. I won't say too much about me, because really we're here to hopefully talk about Jesus and the Kingdom of God, but I am the artistic director and the founder of Pacific Theater. It's a professional theater company that's part of the regular theater community in Vancouver. We put on full-length plays in the theater. I started it in 1984, so we're 33 years old. And we do plays all centered around something of the Kingdom of God. In some way or another, that play touches on a theme that was close to the heart of Jesus, or that shows something about the Kingdom of God, or involves a Christian character, or so-and-so. However, the theater's not evangelistic in any direct sense. It's not propaganda. It's not really, in a direct way, trying to make people into Christians. It's trying to do what art does and explore our stories. The same way as if you talk to somebody on the bus or in the church here today or something and hear a little part of their story and are led to reflect on that, or the way an event can happen in your life and then you and God have to sort out what that means. What does that have to do with you, with eternity? And in the same way, these plays do that. Now, a play is a more carefully shaped experience than a random encounter on a bus, except God shapes our experiences in our lives. So I do feel that by constantly seeing our plays and constantly thinking about the things that I think are close to the heart of God, and by seeing Christian characters who are not rotten human beings, although we're all rotten human beings at some level, so that's there too. I feel like telling those stories in our culture just keeps reminding people that we're here, that God's here, and it may not be a direct evangelism, but I feel like when people leave the theater, I can't go with them and talk to them about what the play means. We don't hand out Bible verses at the end, but I believe that God's Spirit goes with people. And I think that a play changes the way you see the world, changes, it raises questions mostly. And I think we send people out of the door with questions and conversations, and I often pray that God's Spirit will go with them when they leave, as they drive home, go to a coffee shop, whatever they do. And stories have a way of sticking with us. And that's my hope for what our company does. But the bottom line is I feel called to be an actor and to tell stories, and that's what I do. And my hope is always that God shines through what I do. Even if I were a plumber, I would carve Bible verses into the plumbing, but I would hope that in my interactions with that person, at the very least, that a bit of God's kingdom would be incarnated for them. So really, that's the heart of what we're about. It's fitting then that I start today with a bit of a story, and it's a story within a story. The title of the series, The Gospel According to a Christian Executive. It's funny to think of myself primarily as an executive. I think of myself primarily as an artist, but that's the central tension and story in my life for the last 35 years, is to be both of those people. The title of this particular talk, I'm going to say, is The Passion of the Christian Executive. So we're going to talk a little bit about what passion means. In 1924, a young Scottish man was in trouble with his sister. They were planning to go to China and be missionaries. And she was frustrated with her brother Eric because he was distracted. He didn't think all the time about their mission work, and he didn't spend all his time preparing and telling the gospel and getting people ready to support the mission and go on the mission. He spent a lot of his time, he wasted a lot of his time running over the hills around, I think it was Edinburgh, competing in races at the university. And it was hard to see how that had anything to do with their calling, their mission, what they were supposed to do. is to serve the people of China, to bring the gospel to China. Not that it wasn't already there, but the gospel always needs bringing everywhere, doesn't it? And so one day Jenny takes her brother and they go for a walk on the hills overlooking the Scottish city. And she says she's concerned because he's losing his focus. And she says, didn't God make you for China? And he says, God made me for China, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. Well, Eric Liddell went on in 1924 to run in the Olympics. And in fact, to break the world record for the 440-meter race, which wasn't his race. He was a sprinter. But the sprints were going to be held on Sunday. And as a Christian, in that day, we might feel differently now, we might not. In that day, he said, no, that's the Lord's day. I'm not going to run. So his race was to be run that day. And everybody's quite certain he would have won that. Instead, he ran a long distance run and ran it like a sprinter and won it. Remarkable. And then in 1925, he headed for China. And there he served the Lord and the people of China until he died in 1944, I think it was. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Well, now I'll tell you another story about another young man who sat in a movie theater in Vancouver in 1981. Having faced the decision whether to be a pastor or a lawyer or an actor. And I think it was pretty obvious that of those three, two of them would do the world a lot of good. To be a lawyer and fight for justice, to be a pastor and shepherd souls, or to waste my time acting. And I saw what Eric Liddell decided that day. He made me an actor. He made me someone who could tell stories and live inside another character and bring that to life. And when I do that, I feel his pleasure. So maybe that would be okay. And in fact, I'd become a Christian a number of years earlier. How many? I'll quickly do the math. 8 years earlier. And I had loved theater before that, but I wasn't any good at it, really. My lowest mark in grade 10 was my drama class. I lived for drama, and it was my lowest grade. At the beginning of grade 11, I became a Christian. I had a wonderful conversion experience, and a lot of people don't have that experience necessarily, and I did. I didn't even know about being born again. I hadn't heard that word, but I had a spiritual awakening and really felt that experience of new life. And when I did, suddenly my acting took off, and my music. I'd been taking piano lessons a few years, I was not doing very well. And suddenly I leapt forward and I played all the time, not to pass the exam, but because I couldn't tear myself away from the piano because I loved it so much. And those things just grew in my life. So for me, Eric Liddell was somebody who helped confirm what God had already put in me, that he made me a certain way, and why shouldn't I honor his artistry and do what he made me to do? Now when I say made me, I don't mean he made me, like my mom made me finish my vegetables. I mean the way he created me, to honor that shape that was in me, and do that thing. Passion. We could say to follow my passion. That passion is that thing that you love, you crave. It involves feeling. It involves a drive. It involves a vision. It involves a thing that calls you. It says, I want to do this thing. I'm preoccupied by this thing. When I get spare time, I want to do that thing. What is that? And sometimes that means I want to break into stores and steal things, or just crave to take drugs and things. And so there's some discernment here. It's not just what do I want to do the most, but still at a deep level, how has God made us? Frederick Buechner talks about calling and passion. And he says, your calling may be the place where God calls you to, the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. How am I made, and how is the world made, and how might those two things fit? My conversion, as I said, was an opening up to music and theater and many other things. An open awareness of other people. That it wasn't just me, and it wasn't just what I thought and what I cared about and my opinions, but fascination with curiosity about other people. Well, that's not a bad thing to be a Christian. It's not a bad thing to be an actor. Like to be curious. What would that be like to be that person? And then play them on a stage, live out their story, and my curiosity about other people's stories. To watch that play. What's it like to be that person? And I think that's near the whole heart of the gospel. Passion, something that fires us out, something that motivates us. What makes you get out of bed in the morning? Some people's passion is to stay in bed in the morning. That's kind of swell too. Sleeping in can be kind of great. But often it just then fuels us to do the thing that we do out there in the world. And enthusiasm, enthusia. It's what is it? Latin. It's Latin from the Greek. That's right. So a Greek phrase that then was translated into Latin and becomes an English word. En, meaning in. Thusia, derived from theos, God, in God. For us, and there's something about our enthusiasms that where we touch being, there's something divine in that. I think when we have an enthusiasm for birds, bird watchers, there's something about seeing those birds the way God sees them. Honestly, I'm a baseball enthusiast, and I guess it's a little hard to make the case that cheering for the Blue Jays is a spiritual discipline. But I'll tell you, there are years actually. Yeah, it's not just about winning. There's something about our loves that is about loving the creation and loving our fellow human beings. Enthusia. We feel God's pleasure. I love the fact that in that film version of Eric Little's life, I doubt if he said these words, but a screenwriter artistically said, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. And I think that means two things. That's the great thing about art and language and poetry. It doesn't mean just one thing. I think it means when I run, I feel that God is pleased with me. Like my dad looking at me and saying, good job, good job. Like God the Father looking at his son Jesus and saying, behold my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. I feel God's pleasure. I think when Eric Little ran, I think when I act, we feel God's pleasure, saying, my beloved child, thanks for doing the thing I equipped you to do. I would have loved you anyway, even if you never ran, or even if you never went to China, even if you never acted or started Pacific Theater. I love you. But boy, it really makes me happy when I put a particular thing in you, and you do that thing that maybe no one else would do in the way you do it. Awesome. And I think it also means when I run, I feel God's pleasure. Not that he's pleased with me, but I think the pleasure that I feel in running is the feeling God feels when we run. He gave us bodies and he made us physical, and he gives some of us, not me, this isn't Ron speaking, I hate running. Eric Little loved running and it made him alive. And Christ came so we would live abundantly, be fully alive. Irenaeus, I don't even know how you pronounce the word. He was one of the church fathers in the 2nd century. And he wrote a book, a treatise against the heresies. And in book 4, chapter 20, there were a lot of heresies, I guess. He wrote, Gloria Dei est vivens homo, which is translated, the glory of God is man fully alive. Now, forgive him. This was 1800 years ago. I'm sure women probably might be included in that. But it's translated, The glory of God is man fully alive. And I think that when Eric Liddell ran, he was fully alive. And I think he showed the glory of God. And I think he felt the glory of God. He was enthused. He was in the glory of God. So there's something about living that out that's remarkable. And deeply Christian, I think. Living your passion. Having permission to do the thing that you love the most. There's another saying, where love is, there's God. There's another way to think of the word passion. And this is where we're going to cross into this question of Ron as artist and Ron as executive. Now, executive sounds pretty fancy, and I'm wearing a suit, and that sounds like a business executive, like a pretty important guy. This is a costume. Really. I wore this because your email said that there was a dress code. This is business casual. Yeah, I'm a reluctant leader. I started Pacific Theater because in 1984, having finished theater school, I wanted to make theater that I cared about. And that included stories of Jesus and stories of Christian people and other stories. And those stories weren't getting told. And I began to feel sad to know that Damien, the story of Father Damien of Molokai, who sacrificed his life to work with, they were called lepers then, now they're called Hansen's patients, but lepers exiled to die on Molokai, and then he went there to die, live and die with them. But that story would never get told in Vancouver. Nobody in Vancouver would put that play out. Cotton Patch Gospel, it takes the life of Jesus and puts it in the modern South with bluegrass music. And where the people that crucify Jesus are the Klan, who drive his car off the road, who shoot out the tires and lynch him in a forest. That story would never get told in this city then. And I'm like, those stories have to get told. So with a few other Christians, we started Pacific Theater. Not, again, just because the culture needed to hear those stories, not fundamentally as evangelism, but because I lived to tell those stories and they needed to be told, and I wanted to be in the middle of those stories. So we started our company. I never started it in order to run a theater company. Most artistic directors get as much joy out of planning their company, building a business, as they do out of acting in a play. And a lot of them stop acting and start managing more. Maybe they direct plays. And I will tell you this. I find ways to find joy in that part of my work. I find ways to come to terms with it, be at peace with it. It would be an exaggeration to say I hate every minute of it. But not as much of an exaggeration as you might think. For 33 years, well, that's just about Jesus' age. No, believe me, I have no messianic pretensions. Besides, he didn't minister 33 years. He got away with only doing it for 3 years, but it ended badly. But then it ended really well. This is not work I love. Budgets, meetings, sorry, staff meetings, board meetings, sorry. When I return from the summer, and I take the summer away to recharge, to write, to read, to be with my family, to waste entire days with no clock, to have my barbecue and my hammock, and my books, in my backyard, work on a project. I live for that. And then I come back and I'm on the clock again, and the date book fills out, and my heart sinks. And yes, I feel that I need to do that. And I know that when I sit down to write a budget, I've gotten myself through that a lot of the time to go, you're doing this so that you can tell the story of what's needed to put that play on stage, so you can do that play. So I harness the horses of my passion to the cart of the thing that needs doing, and I fundraise, and I meet, and I ask people for favors, and try and get people to come to the shows. Now, it's not all me. I'm not the marketing department, and I'm not the sole fundraiser, and I'm not all that. But the more I have to do those things, the harder it is. And I don't mean to stand here and whine and complain. I've gotten to be in so many plays, right plays, and see them produced. I've gotten to work with extraordinary artists and extraordinary people who come alongside this. And in the middle of that work, I've learned to find joy. But that takes a spiritual discipline. I don't need to work hard at having the right attitude to enjoy rehearsal or enjoy writing a play. I have a constant vigilance to find the joy in being a Christian executive. Passion. Look it up. Just at the top of my Google search for the dictionary, a definition for passion, one was a thing you deeply love, and the other one was the suffering of Jesus. Passion Week is the week between Sunday and Friday. And it looked real good on Sunday when the crowds praised Jesus, but he knew it was coming. And his disciples had been told, although they didn't really catch on very well. And by Friday he was hanging from a cross, having been tortured and beaten for hours. And he died. And that's called the Passion. At a very low point for me, I've hit several of these low points brought about from doing the work of running a theater company. I didn't set out to run a theater company. I set out to act in plays. But in order to act in plays, I had to start a theater company. And then it turned out I was a leader and the other people that started it weren't. And how do you know you're a leader? Because people follow. That's really all there is to it. And I ended up, and I'm also super responsible. It's another of my curses. Firstborn, Canadian, Prairie, Norwegian, Christian. And I just can't let people down. And I can't quit. So I keep doing it. And here we are. But at one of those low points when I really was burnt right out and really rather desperate from doing all that work that I was not built to do easily, a friend shared a book with me. And next to the Bible, it's probably the book of my life. Since reading it, it's probably the book I turn to more often than any and think about more often. It's the book of all the books that next to the Bible has the most underlining in it, the most notes in the margin. It's a book called The Stature of Waiting by W.H. Vanstone. Not a well-known book. I think it's good reason. Partly it's the wisest book I've ever read outside the Bible, but partly because it talks about that kind of passion. He talks about many things, and honestly, I've gone on for 2 hours about this book. How can I summarize it? From a biblical study point of view, he looks at the idea of Jesus, that Judas betrayed Jesus, that he handed him over to the people that killed him. But he points out that the word betrayed is only used once as a verb and once as a noun. And all the other times it says that he handed over Jesus to those who killed him. The same word that's used, that Jesus handed himself over to us, that God handed Jesus over to us. Handing over, surrendering, giving as an offering, laying down on behalf of, a gift. And he talks about Mark's Gospel. And if you've studied any of the Gospels in Greek or even in English, you may notice that Mark's Gospel is the Gospel of action. It sounds like it was, the tradition is that Peter preached. Peter the fisherman, a doer, a temperamental, uneducated fisherman. Go down to Stevesville. Go out on a boat with a fisherman. Oh, that's the life That was the training to be a disciple of Jesus. Who knew? And he tells an action story, and so the Gospel of Mark is an action story. It's short sentences with active verbs, and Jesus does things. Jesus, verb, subject. Jesus told them. Jesus healed her. Jesus went there. Jesus, those are the sentences in Mark, until a verse late in Mark, when it says that Judas handed over Jesus. And from then on, all of Jesus' verbs, with one or two exceptions, are passive verbs. People do to Jesus. They whip him. They crucify him. They arrest him. Jesus is not active. Jesus is passive. The verbs are passive, not active. He is acted upon. He hands himself over. He's the handed over one. And in fact, the word active relates to the verb, the word action, the way passive relates to the word passion. You think of your passion as the thing you want to do, and that is one way that the word works. But another one is what's done to you. And the climax in the gospel is when Jesus is dead, hanging on a cross, a public torture execution. His body is defaced, it's cut into, it's poked, it's pierced, it's whipped. It hangs there, excuse me, like a piece of meat. He's dead. And when he has breathed his last, a Roman centurion, why was he there? I'm sure he was assigned to be there. He was part of the gang that tortured Jesus to death. He saw Jesus now dead and said, truly, this is the Son of God. Not when he saw the miracles, not when he saw the healings, not when he heard the teaching, when he saw Jesus helpless, when he saw Jesus die, when he saw Jesus suffer. He said, that is the Son of God. Oh my goodness. Well, there's much richness in that book that helps us see why, when we're at our weakest, at our lowest, when what we're called on to do gives us the least joy and the least pleasure, and when we're the least effective, and when we're maybe not even being effective leaders. At those times, I'm not even a nice person to be around. The worst parts of my character come out. My impatience, my crankiness, my criticism. I don't want to be that guy, and I can tend to become that guy. So when I'm not being a strong leader, I pray that in that passion, that God shines out. And that's a step of faith, because it's not like at that point I blissfully sit there and just radiate God's goodness. I'm kind of a jerk. But I'm a broken jerk. People know I don't want to be him. Maybe that, I hope. I don't know. So, the passion of the Christian executive. I'm stealing from the passion of the Christ-ian executive. Jesus said, follow me, and he meant come and have an amazing adventure. He said, be alive, live abundantly. I have come that you might have life and have it in abundance. And he also said, take up your cross and follow me. And we just talked about the cross. It's bad. And yet through it, somehow his greatest glory is revealed. So I actually believe that my passion to act, that makes me feel alive, where I feel God's pleasure, and the passion of Passion Week, where I can feel crucified by, or at least this trudging, tedious walk to Golgotha, they are both God's calling for me. I always hope that you get past one and enter into the other. That you suffer for a while to bring about this break thing. Yeah, it's tough now, but man, Pacific Theater's going to be awesome. Boy, these days are tough building our church sometimes here. But someday we'll have a place and we'll have hundreds of people and the gospel will be preached. We'll have a team of pastors and awesome. And it'll still be tough. Sorry. Bad news and the good news are just right there. They're right there. And Eric Little, whose story I told you, when he died in a concentration camp, Japanese concentration camp during World War II. He spent a few years running, tasting Olympic glory, feeling the pleasure of God when he ran. Apparently, even there, he trained kids to run. He found any chance he could to run during his ministry. But once he was in that concentration camp, he dedicated his life to the children that were there and didn't know freedom. Here's what a man said who survived the concentration camp. Often in an evening I would see Eric bent over a chessboard or a model boat or directing some sort of square dance, absorbed, weary, and interested, pouring all of himself into the effort to capture the imagination of these penned-up youths. He was overflowing with good humor and love for life, enthusiasm and charm. It's rare indeed that a person has the good fortune to meet a saint, but he came as close to it as anyone I've ever known. In a concentration camp. Dear Jesus, I often pray that you take this cup from me. We all know that we would rather not suffer, and we would rather not do the work that we don't feel that we love or are good at. But I pray that your glory would be shown in that. And I pray that alongside the things that we live in this broken world, I pray that each one here would find the places in their life to see the glory of your kingdom, the beauty, that they would feel the abundance and the freedom to do that thing that makes their heart glad. I pray for Jonathan. I pray for his family. I pray for the people in the room. That we could live in both kinds of passion. In the name of Jesus, amen. It is time for our communion.